Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is a training question, and the concept is: should I go heavier or should I stay lighter? So if you're doing an exercise and you kind of find yourself possibly stuck in the middle, meaning that at the weight you can currently do, it's almost feeling too light. You can maybe do, too many reps for what your desired or intended rep range is. However, you're kind of afraid to go heavier with the weight because you're not sure if you can do it safely, or you can't get it into position, or you don't think you can do enough reps. So you're kind of in this kind of middle ground of what do I do? If I know the lightweight is too light, but the heavyweight is too heavy, what do I do? So that's what this topic is about today. So we're going to kind of look at both options, weigh the pros and the cons, and then give you the kind of best answer at the end like we normally do. So staying light but moving slow. That is the first option we have, is if my lightweight is too light at normal speed, I can modify my speed, and there's many ways, and we'll discuss them here in a second. But I can modify my speed to make the lightweight feel harder. So this is sometimes a better option if somebody's kind of brand new to lifting, their form is still really kind of sketchy, and they can't really do everything safely yet. Before you would put heavy weight in your own hands, or if you're a trainer, before you put heavy weight in your client's hands, if they can't do the lightweight with like really good, clean, crisp, safe form, it's only going to get like their technique flaws are only going to show up worse if you go heavier. So you have to make sure that they can move safe. So if they can't, staying with the lighter weights is probably a better option. So an example of this is I've had people who are brand new to lifting, and they'll do dumbbell chest presses, and at the top of the press they always open up their back, or they overextend their arm and their shoulders will lift off the bench. They just kind of, instead of pushing to the top with a chest flex, they just kind of shove the dumbbells to the top and overextend their arm and their shoulder. Well, if they were to do that with a heavier weight in their hand, they're not going to have any stability or like balance with that heavier weight once the back opens up, or if their shoulder lifts off the bench. So that might be an option to where we stay at the lighter weight and really hammer home the concept of keeping the back pinched during chest presses and not lifting the front of the shoulder off the bench. So that's something to think of. Like, there's a ton of other examples, but that's kind of a quick one that is pretty common seen as well. So another one we have is like dumbbell one-arm rows. So if you have somebody doing a dumbbell one-arm row and they haven't learned how to manipulate their shoulder first, they just kind of lock their shoulder in place and move the dumbbell with their bicep, that's not going to be a good exercise like technique in order to load heavier weight on. They're just going to use more and more of their bicep. So instead, staying lighter, making them go slower, adding in some of the techniques we're going to talk about, can give them a chance to kind of raise their awareness to their position. So that way they can think of kind of like at the bottom position of the row, having their shoulder extended to the floor, which opens up the back muscles, but then starting the motion with a kind of a contraction of the back, almost like they're going to lift their shoulder to the ceiling before they would ever bend their elbow. So they're going to lift their shoulder to the ceiling and then drive their elbow up to the ceiling. So that gets a back contraction followed by a bicep aided lat contraction. So those are two examples that are very common where somebody is going to feel a little bit stuck on what to do. Is they feel like the lightweight is too light, but their form is kind of crappy, so they're not sure if they can move any heavier. So in our gym, we've actually spent the money to get like 17.5 and 22.5 pound dumbbells to bridge the gaps between 15 and 20 pounds and 20 and 25, because for beginners that can definitely be a large increase. So if somebody can do 15-pound dumbbell presses correctly, to get to 20, that's increasing by 33%. So from a 15-pound dumbbell, adding 5 pounds is adding a third of the weight to it to make the 20-pound dumbbell. So that's kind of a big jump. And then the same thing from 20-pound presses up to 25-pound presses can be a big jump for some people. So this is also I'm using this for pure beginners because it's kind of an easier example to understand. And also, this is typically a question that beginners will ask. So if you get somebody who's like maybe they've lifted for a couple years, like say 1 to 2 years, and they're trying to move up on say squats or deadlifts, and they're like, man, every time I try to move up, my back kind of bugs me or my form breaks down. You'd want to apply the same rules, okay? So at an advanced lift, even if you're an advanced lifter, because if you can't lift correctly and safely, you're going to get injured. So if you're afraid to move up because you're not sure if you can do it safely, don't move up. Especially if you're talking about big lifts with big weights. So if you're, squatting 300, 400 pounds and you try to make a jump and your technique is off, you can, tweak a muscle, tear a muscle, you can get hurt. So these same rules apply to more advanced lifters. However, like I said, advanced lifters often aren't asking this question as much. So, but just to let you know, that this does apply to kind of everybody. So if you're a beginner, this is a good lesson to learn because you'll need to know how to do this or which situation, which choice do I make. You'll need to know the answer to that for the rest of your kind of like lifting exercise career. Okay. So the first reason why we might stay the same and not move up is because of risk of injury or we're uncertain about our technique. Okay. And then another reason why it might be okay to stay lighter is if this is a secondary exercise for the target area, it's not as important if you go heavy. Meaning, if I've already done, say a heavy chest exercise, and now I'm at like a second or a third chest exercise, and I'm not sure if I should go heavy or go light, then you're more likely it's okay to stay light if you've already done something heavy for that muscle. So if we're talking about a leg exercise, if you've already done something heavy for your legs, then it's okay if you stay lighter at this exercise. So if you're at a secondary lift where it's not the heaviest lift for that body part, then it's okay if you need to stay lighter to stay safe. Okay? So ways of moving slow. So we said that would be our option is if I'm going to stay lighter, so we just talked about why it might be a good choice to stay light. Okay, is to keep yourself safe, and then if it's a secondary lift, so it's not the main lift for that body part, then it's okay if you stay light. So those are two reasons it's okay to stay light. Now, how do we stay light but make it worth doing? Okay, we don't want to stay light and then just have it still be the same kind of ho-hum easiness it's always been. So we have to increase our intensity. We have to increase the difficulty in some way. So a couple ideas we have is you can modify your rep speed, which in any exercise you do, there's usually 3 points of motion. There's arguably 4. So I'll just give you all of them, and then we'll talk about the ones that are most important. Okay. So there's when the loaded muscle, okay, the muscle that has the weight load on it, like if you're holding a dumbbell, the muscle that you're targeting, okay, when it's in a fully extended position, that is one position. As you contract the muscle to shorten the length of the muscle, you're contracting it to lift the weight. That's a second kind of portion or position of the rep. Then when you have a full contraction, when you flex the muscle as much as you can possibly flex, that's a third position. And then when you lower the weight under the heaviness, but you lower the weight back to the full stretch position, that's your fourth position. So we have fully extended, we have contracting, we have fully contracted, then we have extending. So hopefully you followed all that. So the ones that most often are important for us is actually the second, third, and fourth. When the muscle is fully extended, and there is absolutely insane amount of detail just in this concept that I'm about to say, but generally, when the muscle is fully extended, that is when the muscle has the least amount of weight load challenge to it. So that portion doesn't often contribute much to the kind of manipulation and stimulus that we're getting from the exercise. So if I'm doing the exercise to get my muscle stronger, when I'm fully extended, that doesn't have as high of a carryover to the strength effect as the other 3 components of the repetition do. So the concentric, the fully contracted position, and then the eccentric, so when you're extending. So those 3 are the most important ones. Hopefully everybody followed me on that one. So when we're contracting the muscle, that's called the concentric. When we're extending the muscle, that's called the eccentric. So C and C, E and E. So they kind of match. Okay, alliteration there. So what we can do, one of the things we can do is modify rep speed, which is, say normally I move the rep with a count of like 1, 2 down, 1, 2 up, 1, 2 down, 1, 2 up, something like that. I can slow that down, and I can take, say, like 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can take twice as long. So if it takes me 2 seconds on the concentric, then I don't really hold the full flex any amount of time. I just start lowering the weight again, and it takes me 2 seconds on the eccentric. I can change that to 4 and 4. So instead of 1, 2 on the way up and 1, 2 on the way down, I can go 1, 2, 3, 4 on the way up and 1, 2, 3, 4 on the way down. Okay? So you just slow everything down like you're in a slow motion movie. So that would be the idea. That's one goal you can do. Another one you can do is to just do the slowed eccentric. So when the muscle's extending under weight load. So they've done a ton of studies and blah, 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 blah. But in general, we have the highest potential to create muscular damage when we're in the eccentric portion of the exercise. So our muscles are designed very well to contract against weight. Okay, so if I'm doing a bicep curl and I'm bringing the dumbbell from my hip up towards my shoulder and I'm doing a bicep contraction, my muscles are made very well to do that motion against weight. Whenever we want to extend that dumbbell, bring it back down to the bottom, okay, back down to my hip. If I'm going very slow and the muscles having to extend and release the contraction, then that can actually cause potentially higher amounts of damage than the contraction part. So often people think when they're contracting their muscle, they're doing the most damage. It's actually when you're extending the muscle is when you're doing the most damage. So sometimes people will slow down just the eccentrics. So if I normally lifted with a 2 count or a 2 second concentric and a 2 second eccentric, I can just make the eccentric portion be longer, say 4 seconds. So it's still 1, 2 on the way up, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4 on the way down. The reason why you would do these differently is if I slow down the entire rep, the concentric and eccentric, okay, then that'll limit my strength significantly. If I keep the concentric portion at my normal speed, but I slow down the eccentric, I can actually move a little bit more weight. So it kind of depends on how slow or how hard do I need to make it. If I need to make a lightweight feel really hard, I'll slow down all parts of the rep. If I need to make it just feel somewhat harder, I might only slow down the eccentric, not the concentric. Okay? Then we have, the last thing we kind of have is what's called isometrics and pauses. So isometric is when you're in a fully contracted position, you would actually just hold that position for whatever count. You can be 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever. So I might do 1, 2 on the contraction, and now that I'm fully contracted, I might hold that position for 1, 2, and then start to extend the muscle for my eccentric going 1, 2 on the way down. So you can see that these are all subtle differences, but there's actually an enormous amount of variance in why you would do one versus the other. But for this podcast, we're just going to kind of consider them all blended together. So rep speed is slowing down everything in the rep. Slowed eccentrics is slowing down just the eccentric, the extending part of the range of motion. And isometrics is extending the fully contracted position. Okay? So another way of thinking of that is like it pauses. If we ever do like a pause squat where you go to the bottom of the squat, which is typically the hardest position, but then instead of coming right back up, you just stop there and you hold that position for say 2 or 3 count, and then you try to stand up, it feels much harder. So the reason why that's not considered an isometric is just because the terminology is not commonly used that way. So some of the muscles in the bottom of a squat, well, actually, all of them pretty much, are extended and stretched, but it's an active stretch position. Whereas if I'm at the bottom of a bicep curl, that's a less active stretch position. So this is getting like kind of nitty gritty, but it's better for you guys to know these terms. So you would typically not call a pause squat an isometric squat. Okay, that's a weird phrasing in the lifting world. So somebody who knows enough will know what you mean, but you won't be saying it in the way that they would commonly say it. So it's better for us to kind of know terminology so we don't sound like dorks. But an isometric is whenever the fully contracted position is your hardest position. They typically call that like you want to do an isometric pause or an isometric. When the fully extended position is the difficult position, they typically just refer to that as paused positions. So if I'm going to do a paused bench press, I'm going to pause at the bottom when I'm fully stretched because it's a really hard position. That's typically considered a pause. If I were to lift to the top of the rep and flex my chest and triceps, okay, in a full contraction, and I held that position, that would typically be called an isometric. So isometrics are typically when the fully contracted position is the most difficult. Pauses are typically when the fully extended position is the most difficult. Okay, so hopefully that was able to follow that. But those are your choices. So if you want to stay light in order to stay safe, and or you already did a heavy lift for that body part, okay, the ways in which to use the same weight, staying light, but make it feel harder, is to slow various portions of the rep. So you can either slow the entire rep speed down, you can either slow the eccentric, or you can do pauses or isometrics in the fully stretched or fully contracted positions. Okay, so that's one option. The other one we have is to go ahead and try the heavier weight. So if you feel like your form is safe enough and you really want to push for your results, then you can go ahead and try the heavier weight. Okay. Now, the other reason that you'd want to move up in weight is if this is the only exercise you're doing for that specific body part and it is meant to be the one that makes you stronger, then you have to move up. You cannot stay at the light weights forever. You have to move up and try the harder weights, okay? And that's really important because you have to build strength and you have to create muscle damage in order to get your results. And that is for all results, whether you're looking for fat loss, whether you're looking for strength gains, muscle building, muscular endurance, okay? You have to lift heavier in order to get your best results. You have to make your current body feel challenged in order to grow to something new. In order to get new, you have to do new. So you have to do the new weights eventually, okay? Especially if it's your primary exercise and if you feel safe enough. So if you don't feel safe enough yet, do the lighter techniques until you feel safe, and then go ahead and try to push to the heavier weights, okay? So in podcast number 190, it's actually a trainer education podcast. We made it for trainers, but everybody can understand it as well, is we talk about how to progress a weak client. So if you do feel like you're weak and that you potentially could be holding yourself back by not going to the heavier weights, go listen to podcast 190, and it explains to trainers and to yourself how you would make progress when somebody's a little bit on the weaker side, okay? Another podcast we have is number 181, titled Using Muscle Damage for Fat Loss. So if your goal is to lose fat, why can't you just do 1,000 reps of really light weight? Because it's stupidly ineffective, okay? It will not work. Yep, I'm not even saying anything added to that. There's no asterisk to it. There's no special case. If you stay with light weights for 1,000 reps, you will not lose fat. Yep. Okay, I'm just letting that sink in here a little bit, okay? So you can't do light weights for sets of 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 and think you're burning body fat. You're not. You might as well just be doing cardio and wasting your time. You need to lift heavy. You need to cause muscle damage in order to lose body fat. And podcast 181 talks about the science of that, why that's the case. Okay? So if you don't care if you're getting stronger, you don't care if you have big muscles, you just want to get rid of body fat, you still need to lift heavy. You still need to create muscle damage. Okay? Cool. Now, how do we make the heavy weights work? So we talked about with the lighter weights, how you can make them feel harder. Well, how do we make heavier weights feel easy enough that we can actually do them. Okay, so one of the concepts we have is rest pause. So if I have a goal of my reps being, say, 10 reps, and if I moved up to the heavier weight option I have and I can only do 6, crap, that's not my goal, right? Well, you can use a technique called rest pause. And it's literally what it sounds like is you do whatever reps you can, you rest the weights, you pause for a little bit, then you kick the weights back into position and you try to go some more. So if I'm trying for 10 and I can only do 6, I might get my 6, I might rest the weight, I'm going to pause for, maybe 5 or 10 seconds, get back into position, and then do the next 4 reps to get my 10 total. So that would be 10 reps with 1 rest pause. And I would typically write the reps down, so I usually write it as 6-4. Okay? Then the next time I come in, maybe I can get 7-3. So I can get 7 before I have to rest the weight, pause for a little bit, kick them back up, and do my other 3. Then maybe I can do 8 and 2, 9 and 1, then maybe eventually 10. Okay? But that's how you have to do it at first, is you still have to get to your accumulated time under tension, or your accumulated rep goals, okay, in order to get the results that you want. So in podcast 214, titled Understanding Rep Ranges and Expected Results, is if my goal in my paper, my program says I should be doing something for, say, 20 seconds of time under tension, okay, but I only do it for 10 seconds, I'm not going to get the same result. So if my program says to do it for 8 to 12 reps and I'm only ever getting 5 or 6, I'm not getting the result that I wanted. I have to stay within the prescribed rep range to get the results that are associated with that rep range. So you use rest pause, but you still have to get eventually to where you need to be. So say my goal was 10 and I got 6, I tried to get the next 4 and I only got 3. Well, then I take another rest pause and I do 1. So I might have 10 reps with 2 rest pauses labeled as 6, 3, 1. Something like that. Then eventually, like we said, maybe next time you come in, you can do 6 and 4. Maybe 7, 2, and 1. Something like that. It's just you want to eventually be able to do better every time you come into the gym. So rest pause means that you stay with that same weight. So you rest that weight, you pause for a little bit, but then you keep that same weight and you keep going again. So that's one option. The other option we have is drop sets, which is the same thing except for when you rest the weights, you swap them out for lighter ones. So maybe I'm trying to do the 20-pound dumbbells and I'm trying for 10 reps and I can only get 6. And then even if I wait 10, 15, 20 seconds, I still can't get those dang things back into position because I'm just so fatigued. Instead of the 20-pound dumbbells, I might try the 15. So maybe I get 6 with the 20, and then I grab the 15s instead of staying with the 20s, and all of a sudden I can get maybe another 5 or 6, and that gets me a couple extra reps. So the nitty-gritty details of which one you should use are too large of a topic for me to discuss and throw into this podcast. But these are both just 2 good ideas on how to make the heavier weight more manageable. You either use the heavier weight with multiple pauses in between, however many pauses is needed to get to the reps you need, or you use the heavy weight for one little quick bout of effort, but then you drop back down to the lighter weight to kind of finish out your reps. You can do it either way. If one of them is like, for example, if you stay with the heavy ones but your form is still iffy, you have a higher injury risk. So maybe you just try one little quick bout of effort with the heavy ones, but then you move back to your light ones so that way you can stay safe. So it's all a call of just kind of the individual. So whenever I'm training my clients, this is what I do. This is what they pay me for, is throughout the workout, I'm making these small adjustments all the time to deciding on which technique. These aren't even all of them, by the way, not even remotely close to all the techniques, but they're the ones that are probably the most common used and easier ones for everybody to understand in the podcast. But I have to pick and choose what's the right technique for the moment we're in, for the exercise we're in, for the person I'm with, whether they're having a good day, bad day, whether it's the first workout of the week or it's the second or third workout of the week, whether they had good food, bad food, all that stuff. Everything factors into which choice I make in terms of which technique. So it's going to take some trial and error on your guys' and girls' part, but now you at least have some tools in your tool belt. Okay, you have some ideas of what to do, and instead of just kind of feeling lost in between the 2 weights. Okay, So just remember that in order to get new, you have to do new. You can't stay at the light weights forever. You have to make the light weights feel harder. And like we said, you can do that by just modifying the speed of different portions of the rep. But eventually you have to get to the heavier ones. How do you do the heavy ones safe? Like we said, is kind of breaking them up into rest pauses or doing just one quick bout with the heavy one and then dropping to lighter weights, which is called a drop set. Okay? So you have to, every time you come into the gym, make something feel harder than the last time you were in the gym. If nothing feels harder, your body doesn't change. If it can already do what you're asking it to do, why would it ever make any changes? If it doesn't need to be different, why would it be different? Okay? So you have to make sure that somehow the intensity in your workouts goes up every single time you come into the gym. Now, podcast number 70, we talk about the importance of progressions. Why it's important to move forward and challenge yourself every time you work out. The reason why is because that's the only way your body will continue to grow. Is it has to have a challenge to meet. If it doesn't feel challenged, it will not grow. Okay? So the idea of whether you stay the same, or you go heavier, no matter which one you choose, you have to make that feel harder than the last workout you did in some way. If you always use the same weights and you always do the same reps, you're going to get the same damn results, which is the current body you have now, forever and ever and ever. Okay? So hopefully this gave you some ideas. We got into some of the nitty-gritty of the kind of details of verbiage, but I personally would want to know what the correct way to say things is, so I don't sound like an idiot. I'm already going to sound like an idiot on my own in many other ways. So if there's one way for me to prevent one way of sounding like an idiot, I would like to know. So hopefully you guys find it valuable to know what the correct terminology is, and hopefully I didn't lose you on that stuff. So again, hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions on this specifically for you, shoot us an email to brutalironGym@gmail.com. We will answer it and we'll get you the help that you need. Okay? So thank you for listening to this, and hopefully it answered some questions for everybody. So if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Brutal Iron Gym. Also, if you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. Please, please, please. The more people we help, the happier the world will be. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. So this podcast is for you, so we want to know what you want to learn about. And you can tell us at our email, brutalironGym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.